West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Dallas Morning News has a direct message to the governor of Texas, and it reads in part like this. Governor Abbott, you responded that this was an unspeakable tragedy. We tell you that it was not unspeakable, and that the people of Texas need you to speak to it and its cause. There is nothing conservative about refusing to acknowledge evidence or give voice to the true nature of a problem. You must speak to the terrible imbalance that you and Republican leaders have created between the individual liberty of nearly unrestricted ownership of the most powerful rifles and guns versus the increasing decline in society's ability to function without constant fear of violent death. This has to stop. You cannot say this is unspeakable tragedy and move on. A leader must have the courage to speak. You must look at this horror, at the devastation wrought on these people, and you must summon the will to act to change the laws that have put us in this terrible place. And you know what he and other Republicans would say to that. You know what he would say. He would say, mental health, look over
but
here.
Nobody believes it.
Well, what's he doing about mental health, by the way?
Nobody believes it anymore. I look at funding in Texas for mental health. Compare it to other states, I'm sure it's near the bottom or close to the bottom. I mean, there's always this talk about mental health. Anytime you corner somebody in a debate about weapons of war, and how little children are being slaughtered, and how worshipers are being slaughtered in churches, in synagogues, at country music festivals, at shopping malls, and they have nowhere to go. They go, mental health, ignoring the fact that there are mental health problems in London, there are mental health problems in Paris, there are mental health problems across Europe. But the United States, far and beyond any other industrialized country, any other Western country, the numbers are staggeringly high here compared to everywhere else, where they have as many mental problems as the United States does. And Elise Jordan, you have a group of migrants being run down and killed. Look at this. U.S. has by far the highest child and teen firearm mortality rate among peer countries. Our little children are being slaughtered, and Greg Abbott has nothing to say about it. He just wants to change the subject. But after Greg Abbott cynically, cruelly looked at a rampage inside of a home where a child and his mother and family slaughtered by an AR-15. And yes, an illegal immigrant. The question is, how did he get that AR-15? The governor cynically and cruelly focused on the immigration status of these poor people and that little boy that were slaughtered and called them illegal immigrants. Right off the top. Just inhumane. But you wanted to focus on that. Illegal immigrants. So is it any surprise that we have migrants being run over? Since with this sort of lack of leadership, this sort of cynicism, this sort of hatred in Texas, is it any surprise that we have migrants on Sunday morning, some of them probably going to church, getting run over while they're waiting for a bus? Or that we have neo-Nazi sympathizers, possible white supremacists going to malls to gun down other people? I mean, there is a sickness in the state of Texas, and that sickness starts at the very top with Greg Abbott, who refuses to protect little children in the state of Texas, whether it's at school or whether it's at church or whether it's at shopping malls or even inside their own homes.
Joe, how is this anything but homegrown extremism? How are we not responding to this in a way equal to after 9/11? I mean, took that terrorist threat pretty seriously, perhaps, went a little overboard in some areas, but that's another here and there. But we just sit around and do absolutely nothing while these high capacity magazines are freely available for assault rifles and assault weapons. And I just, how does this 33-year-old have a tactical vest? How does he have this kind of gear? How is it so readily available that a normal citizen can outgun a cop? You heard that bystander talking about what they saw, and the child covered in so much blood he couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl, a 4-year-old. And yet we are doing absolutely nothing differently. Takes a while to get a driver's license and you can fail that test, but apparently anyone can have a gun pretty much in this country.
Just like you have to wear a seatbelt. But, are people allowed to walk around with bombs, live grenades? Because if you look at the destruction that these AR-15 style weapons are causing upon the human body, this makes no sense. It
makes no sense, and everybody should go back and they should look at the Washington Post article that studies the difference between an AR-15 bullet when it enters the human body and other bullets. It so clearly was designed as a weapon of war, which it was, a weapon of war. And its only use is to kill multiple people.
And that is what has happened.
As quickly as possible. That is its only use. And I've said it time and time again, as somebody that owns guns, if you want to stop somebody in your house, if there's an intruder in your house, take out the shotgun. Hard to miss, does the job, and does the job better than an AR-15 inside close quarters. Anybody that knows anything about guns can tell you that. But anyway, Rev, after 9/11, we did everything we could do. Elise said some people suggested that we did too much. Dick Cheney talked about the 1% solution. If there was a 1% chance that something bad was going to happen, he was going to do everything to stop that 1%. Here we are in 2023, and people are getting gunned down every day in states like Texas. And 90% of Americans want universal background checks. 75% of Americans want red flag laws. The majority of Americans want military-style weapons like AR-15s banned. And what do Republicans say? Other than the 10 who voted for reform in the Senate, what do Republicans say? We can't do anything. We're helpless. I'm sorry, 80% want red flag laws. They say we can't do anything. We're weak. We're inept. We're just pathetic legislators that can't stop the killing of little children. There's nothing we can do. I mean, Americans don't think this way, Rev. Americans have never thought this way, especially when their loved ones are being slaughtered. And yet that's what Republicans want us to think, because they care more about the gun lobby and gun manufacturers making money than they do protecting little children in malls, little children in churches, little children in synagogues, and little children even inside their own homes.
It is almost as if you would say, on one hand, you have a gun, another hand, your child, and you show more love to the gun than your child. I mean, it is really that serious. And for Governor Abbott to try and duck the issue by saying we need to deal with the mental health issue, all of us want to deal with the mental health issue. You're hosting a special on that tonight, prime time. But that does not address what is available now. If you really believe there was a mental health issue, Governor Abbott, and there is, that's all the more reason why you wouldn't have AR-15 and military weapons available to people until we deal with the mental health issue. It is absolutely insulting to our intelligence to leapfrog the immediate to deal with the justified long-term problem of mental health. And for these people to be sitting in a state that has seen this consistently happen right in their state, at some point they're going to have to rise up and put people in office that will deal with the issue and not try to kick the can down the road.
It is Monday, the 8th of May of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. Indeed, we had somewhat of a weekend, now didn't we? I suppose in the greater scheme of things, because of, well, how transient and temporary this plane of existence can be for some of us. Lesser on the news cycle would be that Donald Trump went past that deadline in which to respond to the judge in the E. Jean Carroll trial, whether he was going to show up. And apparently by his not meeting that deadline to let the judge know, he is not going to be testifying. But apparently he will continue talking about it as if, well, he's trying to influence somebody, someone, or group. The judge did, along with the, the E. Jean Carroll team had petitioned the judge to tell Trump to take down some issues that had been brought out in the trial off of social media and whatnot. Actually, I think the judge ordered him to do that. And it remains to be seen whether Trump will follow those orders, because apparently the law doesn't apply to him. He is part of that rarefied group who are above it all. I suppose the Supreme Court might be part of that too, but that's a whole other story. Speaking of other stories, of course, what's happening in Texas. And yeah, there is a sickness in Texas, and it starts at the top with Greg Abbott. I would say that maybe that sickness has been long coming. The NRA has had their hands bloodied by these murders long before Charlton Heston became part of the PR team about, you keep your hands off of my guns over my cold dead hands. Okay. All right. Well, we warned that this would happen, and it is. Now, there's a greater work at play. When I say greater, I mean there's something more insidious at play behind just giving everybody and their mom a gun. It's not done just willy-nilly. I mentioned on social media that those who had been fortunate enough to take a Western movement class from my dad, they would have learned that how the West was, quote, conquered, is that you would send settlers out to settle in native territory, for instance. And then while at the same time or just before, you send trappers out there, but they're not really trappers. They're disguised as trappers. Oh, yes, they're trapping. But they're also gun runners. And they would sell guns to everybody and their mom. And then the settlers would come in, and of course, the inevitable conflicts would arise. People would die. And then the settlers would ask the government for a fort to be built to protect them from the savages. A fort would be built. And then settlers would be sent out into the boonies to settle in native territory, not caring one whit about tradition, cultural determination, or even the ecology. And trappers would have been ahead of them in the boonies, running guns, selling guns to everybody and their mom. And then when the settlers don't like what's going on, and the reprisals are inevitable, they ask for a fort to be built. A fort is built. Rinse, repeat, leapfrog across the continent. So I would insist that this arming everybody has a purpose. And we've been using that to get what we want for a very long time. The chaos, the lawlessness, and then what happens? Something must be done. Something must be erected. Someone and something must be in charge. So what is this end game they're playing with this give everybody and their mom a gun and the inevitable chaos that will occur, just as everybody predicted? What is the end game? I would surmise it has something to do with a goose step march, but that's just me. Or is it just me? No, we're waking up to it. So, we're killing all these kids. We're killing families. We got right-wing death squad members going into malls. Oh, he couldn't have been a white supremacist because he was Hispanic. Yeah. As if there was no racism in the Hispanic community. What a bunch of racists that would say BS like that. I'm Pinochet and the School of America's years old. Aren't we all? We should be. So, we got actual avowed neo-Nazis going in and blasting things up to smithereens. And of course it's a mental health issue. There's no argument that Albert Speer, Goering, Goebbels, et al. Were crazy-ass lunatics. But is that going to be the excuse to admonish them? We're going to let them off the hook? Oh, yeah, sure they were Nazis. Sure they were torturing people and killing people. But, you know, they had some mental issues, so we have to let them go. No, we never thought like that. But here we are. We are one sick society. And I would say that it's not all of us. We know which group is responsible for all of this. And it ain't Antifa. It ain't Drag Queen Story Hour. Jeez. It's not Jane Fonda passing out guns to everybody and their mom, saying, have at it. We want to get what we want, and we're going to get it at the point of a gun. The barrel of a gun, I'm sorry. Okay. And we're supposed to just take it? Nope. I don't think it's going to happen. I think people are waking up. Won't it be happening in Texas, not while these ghouls are in charge. Jeez. What a hateful, bigot, racist Abbott is. Right after he speaks about some illegal aliens, it was illegal aliens that got killed, so that doesn't really matter as much because they were just illegal aliens, and they weren't actually illegal aliens. They were permanent residents, but I guess in Greg Abbott's racist mind, that makes them illegal. What is he? Anyway, right after he makes that proclamation, what happens? Some crazy-ass guy in Brownsville, I believe, runs his SUV over a bunch of people, and I got to tell you, I unfortunately saw that. I really didn't want to look at the body pile at the mall. I'm not interested in that. I don't need to see dead bodies to know what a dead body looks like. I don't need to linger on it. I don't need to see an accident when it's happening, but I unfortunately saw that one, and that was bad. Now, reports are that this is a Hispanic male. Some reports are also saying, oh, but he was drunk. Okay, so he was a drunk, racist, xenophobic Hispanic male. Okay. Oh, it's okay. He just killed some other Hispanics, so that's like Hispanic on Hispanic crime, so that doesn't really matter as much to us. Whatever us is. That's the meme they're trying to put out right now. Even the Hispanic people in America don't want all these asylum seekers taking our jobs. Jeez. Yeah, we're so worried about our jobs being taken. They're getting rid of child labor laws so they can put little kids to work, probably little unaccompanied minors kidnapped at the border. Because our own homegrown kids might know too much. They might want to unionize. Kitty union. All right. Local 666 romper room. I don't know. Is it the apocalypse? Might be. It ain't Antifa. It ain't Drag Queen Story Hour. It's not Scary Clowns. No, we got some goose-stepping Nazis. That's what our problem is. It took Texas authorities. In fact, I don't actually think Texas authorities have said much of anything about this mall shooter and why. As soon as there was some equivocation on any kind of information about this guy, I knew, or I'll just say I suspected, I had a strong suspicion that this had to do something with the guy being a Nazi, right-wing white supremacist. Oh, he can't be a white supremacist because look at his surname. So effing what? Cortez thought he was white. Just saying. Thought, said he was, and he was. I don't know. Can you tell I'm perturbed? Sorry about that. Oh, well, I just turned and looked at the time, and I better just give you what we have in store for the rest of the show before the show's over. And there is that sickness in Texas, as I mentioned, and Joe said that it does start at the top with Greg Abbott, and Joe almost said uttered an F-bomb on his show. That was interesting, too. On the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe as we start on this River City Hash Mondays, Ron DeSantis deploys the state police to enforce his political agenda, and many in the agency do not like it. Far-right activist Eamon Bundy's latest standoff is in court. I don't know why this guy gets all the breaks either. And FAA acting administrator Billy Nolan warned of summer travel havoc if GOP budget cuts pass, holding the debt ceiling hostage, the good faith and credit of the United States. Who does that? Yeah, goose steppers do that. After the break, we move to the chef's table where a Paraguayan far-right populist who blamed election fraud for his third-place finish in last week's presidential election has been detained by police because he's lying about there being election fraud. Boy, I wish we could do that here. And Botticelli's Venus is an influencer, but Italy is not happy about it. Do they think the half shell is only half full? All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page to the left from that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really does help us pay our bills. And we found that when you pay your bills, you sometimes fly under the radar, and you can continue this powerhouse of resistance as we've been resisting for over a dozen years. And thank you for allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many years ago. If you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could send those funds our way once a month, thus becoming a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really does help us pay those bills, so thank you for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary 10 minutes before showtime, but you can find the show notes and links diaries by going to my social media feeds because the links are right there. Go do it. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Okay, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays is by Beth Reinhard from the Washington Post. The mission was a tightly held secret as two agents from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement traveled to a remote Texas town hundreds of miles away on the U.S.-Mexico border. They worked for a statewide police agency charged with protecting the governor and investigating major crimes. But last summer, they were enlisted in a highly unusual effort, laying the groundwork for a politically charged operation ordered by Governor Ron DeSantis to fly border crossers from San Antonio to the liberal haven of Martha's Vineyard. Border crossers? Border crossers is an insidious way of referring to asylum seekers. Tomorrow we meet FDLE at 0900 and have a full day on the schedule, wrote Perla Huerta, a former Army counterintelligence officer working with the FDLE agents. In a text message released by the governor's office, migrants later said they were lured onto the flights with false promises by Huerta, who has not commented on the claims or her work for a private contractor involved in the operation. The statewide police force's on-the-ground involvement in planning the September 14th flight speaks to how DeSantis has increasingly deployed FDLE outside its traditional portfolio in support of its own political agenda, according to a Washington Post review of court documents, state records, and interviews with more than a dozen current and former administrators and agents, many of whom spoke on the condition of anonymity because of fear of retribution. Really? Now, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement members surveilled buses traveling through Florida with unaccompanied migrant children as the governor bashed President Biden's immigration policies. They rounded up felons alleged to have voted illegally as DeSantis touted a new election crimes office popular with the right wing. And they were asked to scrutinize the crime-fighting record of a Democratic prosecutor who had repeatedly clashed with the governor. Inside the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, many members balked at these directives from the governor's office, which they viewed as political stunts orchestrated to raise DeSantis's national profile. The Post interviews found, and some who openly resisted the governor's priorities were pushed out. Several former top officials spoke on the record with the Post for the first time regarding their concerns about executive overreach into law enforcement, which they said escalated after DeSantis installed a new FDLE chief last spring. DeSantis, a likely presidential contender in 2024, has built a reputation as a culture warrior in the GOP by weaponizing state government against school districts that required masks, companies that balked at his education policies, and private venues that hosted drag performances. But the former FDLE officials say that the governor is taking a particularly dangerous risk by politicizing a statewide police force with a $300 million budget, almost 2,000 employees, and the broad power to launch criminal investigations and make arrests. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement is responsible for investigating major violent, drug, economic, and computer crimes, along with political corruption, including potential complaints about the governor's office. The governor's office did not respond to a detailed list of questions from the Post about his oversight of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Deputy Press Secretary Jeremy Redfern instead pointed to a recent report from a statewide grand jury impaneled at DeSantis' request and overseen by the statewide prosecutor under Republican Attorney General Ashley Moody that blasted the Biden administration's treatment of unaccompanied minors across the border and its failure to properly vet all caregivers who take them in. The Biden administration is failing to secure our nation's borders, and Governor DeSantis will continue to fight back, Redfern said. Court documents show the governor tapped the Florida Department of Law Enforcement last year to serve as the lead investigator for the grand jury's work, which would later fuel his talking points on illegal immigration. The agency declined to comment on its role. In response to the Post's questions about the governor's influence, the agency said in a statement that it serves the public and its mission has not changed. DeSantis has suggested the Florida Department of Law Enforcement should report exclusively to him, though the Florida Constitution gives shared oversight to the governor and cabinet. He's consolidated power under a 2022 law that allowed him to swiftly anoint new FDLE leadership while also significantly cutting down on the cabinet meetings meant to provide oversight of the agency. Rebecca Boone of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. A far-right activist best known for his showdowns with federal and state law enforcement officials in Oregon and Nevada is waging a one-sided standoff of a different kind after refusing to comply with court orders in an Idaho defamation lawsuit. The lawsuit by St. Luke's Regional Health was filed more than a year ago, accusing Eamon Bundy and his close associate Diego Rodriguez of making defamatory statements against the hospital and its employees after Rodriguez's infant grandson was temporarily removed from his family and taken to St. Luke's amid concerns for his health. Since then, Bundy has ignored court orders related to the lawsuit, filed trespassing complaints against people hired to deliver legal paperwork, and called on scores of his followers to camp at his home for protection when he learned he might be arrested on a warrant for a misdemeanor charge of contempt of court. We can build a defense system from here. This is what is going to keep us safe from all the terrible things that are going to come upon us and throughout the world, Bundy told dozens of people gathered at his home in late April, according to a video of the speech posted on Facebook. Bundy's rhetoric is similar to how he spoke during his armed standoffs with federal law enforcement in Nevada and Oregon several years ago, but this time, despite frequent YouTube videos, far-right media interviews, and a call to action text sent to the People's Rights Network members, Bundy has not gained the same traction. The initial gathering of dozens appears to have shrunk to a handful. In 2016, Bundy led a 41-day armed occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge near Burns, Oregon, to protest the arson convictions of two ranchers who set fires on federal land where they had been grazing their cattle. The reason they set the forest on fire, just as a reminder, is because they were covering up their crime of poaching deer. In 2014, the 2014 Nevada confrontation was led by Bundy's father, rancher Cliven Bundy, who rallied supporters to stop officers from impounding Bundy Ranch cattle over more than $1 million in unpaid fees and penalties for grazing livestock on government land. Eamon Bundy was acquitted of criminal charges in Oregon, and the Nevada criminal case ended in a mistrial. I should mention the reason he was acquitted of criminal charges in Oregon is because, for the first time, instead of drawing the jury pool from the county of Multnomah, where the court case was being tried, they decided to take a jury pool from only the rural areas and bus all those people in. And I'm just mentioning that because the rural areas are pretty much Bundy land. Eamon Bundy and his People's Rights Organization drew attention for a series of protests at the Idaho State House over coronavirus-related measures, and he was temporarily banned from the government building in 2020. In the current lawsuit, Bundy seems to be following a blueprint using rhetoric similar to that used in the Oregon and Nevada standoffs to escalate the conflict, said Devin Burghardt, the director of the Institute for Research and Education on Human Rights. Burghardt has been hired by the St. Luke's attorneys to serve as an expert witness in the defamation lawsuit. Bundy has attempted to take the lawsuit and make it into something larger. If he's able to take the trial and turn it into a larger confrontation, that could be very problematic, Burghardt said. Fewer people seem willing to put their lives on hold, though, to stay at Bundy's property this time, Burghardt noted. The in-person response may be dwarfed by online reaction. At least 3 witnesses in the defamation lawsuit are unwilling to testify against Bundy in court, according to court documents filed by St. Luke's, because they fear they might be harmed by Bundy's supporters. David Koenig of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The acting head of the Federal Aviation Administration said that budget cuts approved by House Republicans would cause the agency to furlough thousands of workers and stop hiring new air traffic controllers, making summer air travel even worse. The FAA acting administrator, Billy Nolan, said in a letter to lawmakers that spending cuts would also slow efforts to modernize technology, including an alert system that failed in January and briefly grounded planes around the country. Nolan issued the warning in a required report to Congress about a shortage of air traffic controllers. He said the FAA is on pace to hit its goal of hiring 1,500 controllers by the end of September and is chipping away at a shortage that is made worse by the pandemic when the agency suspended training new controllers. Last month, the House approved legislation to raise the U.S. debt limit and ensure the government can pay its bills, but in a close party line vote, Republicans attached deep cuts in domestic spending, plus restrictions on the IRS and a ban on student loan relief. Republicans on the House Transportation Committee declined to comment because they're terrorists, and they don't need to tell us anything until they're right and ready. The House passed measure is almost certain to be blocked in the Senate or killed with a presidential veto, but Republicans hope they can force Joe Biden to negotiate and accept deeper domestic cuts than he would prefer. Now, according to the report that Nolan sent to Congress, the FAA ended last September with 10,578 certified controllers, short of its target of 12,062, with another 3,000 people in various stages of training. Well, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again. From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, Word to Your Mother. Beau is Afraid is a hard movie to classify. Presented in 5 identifiable chapters, it could be called a horror comedy, but it's more like a psychological thriller with some really dark, humorous parts. At its core, the plot of Beau is straightforward enough. A man tries to return to his childhood home after hearing that his mother has died unexpectedly in a freak accident. Of course, since this is Ari Aster, the writer-director of the previously unlikely hits Heredity and Midsummer, we know that a bizarre ride is in the offing. This one feels like a Freudian fever dream, complete with the legend of Beau's father's death during sex and a penis monster in the attic. Indeed, you'd be hard-pressed to name a film more Freudian than this one, in which we find a highly successful, overpowering mother, played by both Zoe Lister-Jones and the divine Patti LuPone, who goes to such extremes to protect her only child from the world that she essentially destroys his emotional growth. Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal of Beau is nothing less than extraordinary, proving once again that Phoenix is arguably one of the best actors working today. However, fine performances aside, Beau is Afraid is at times overwhelming. Running a minute under 3 hours, it's a marathon that isn't for those used to movies of this genre ending in 90 minutes with all, if not most, of the loose ends tied up. And anyone who claims to have Beau is Afraid all figured out at the end is probably lying, or at the very least not picking up on the details. This one is a college-level film class oozing with symbol and metaphor at every turn and requiring repeat viewings, which few are going to want to give it. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
"20 years after the United States government began locking up people in Guantanamo Bay, why are prisoners still there, not yet having had a trial?" I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Some are in Gitmo because although they've been cleared for release, that is, they've been found to not pose a danger, they can't be returned to their home country. Others are there because they were so relentlessly tortured that a trial isn't possible, so they just sit. George W. Bush, whose administration set up the Gitmo detention facility, by the end of his second term said, quote, he very much wanted to close Gitmo. Barack Obama, early on, committed to closing it, but he didn't. Donald Trump said that Gitmo was a good way to deal with, quote, bad dudes, and signed an executive order to keep it open. President Joe Biden, in contrast, early on said he wanted to close Gitmo, but that hasn't happened yet either. It's time. It's past time that the administration figured out how to make that happen. After all, how can the United States stand as a beacon for the rule of law when our prison in Guantanamo still holds prisoners day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, with, for most, no trial and no end in sight? The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1863. That was the day that Division 1 of the Brotherhood of the Footboards was founded in Detroit, Michigan. By the next year, they had changed their name to the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers. In the early years of railroad transportation, the men who worked on the rails worked long hours under tough physical conditions. Any attempt to organize or strike was brutally crushed. The engineers had attempted to organize as early as 1855, but the effort had failed. Convinced the workers needed to join together, William D. Robinson, an engineer who worked out of Michigan, called a meeting. 19 men gathered at his house in Marshall, Michigan. The meeting laid the groundwork for forming a union. The next month, a dozen engineers met in Detroit and elected Robinson as the leader of their new organization. The Brotherhood set up its headquarters in Cleveland, Ohio. Over the summer, they began to organize more divisions. Soon, 10 locals were established across Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. The next year, the Brotherhood held its first national convention in Indianapolis. The Brotherhood became one of the big four labor organizations of railroad workers, alongside the trainmen, firemen, and conductors. The engineers established labor banks and printed a journal, initiatives that helped build their strength. These early railroad brotherhoods were for the most part only open to white men to join as members. Working on the vital transportation lines that moved the nation's goods and people gave the Brotherhood leverage at the negotiation table. The Big Four won gains in working hours and conditions that helped to pave the way for unions in many other sectors of the economy. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Ash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 45 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of around 60. Cloudy this morning with showers developing a little bit later this morning and through the afternoon, though we do have some light rain falling at the moment. Winds will be light and variable, and we had over a quarter of an inch of rain fall overnight, and looks like we'll get something a little less than that today. Cloudy skies early tonight, then partly cloudy after midnight, lows in the low 40s, winds light and variable, and then sunshine tomorrow, along with some cloudy intervals. Highs in the low 70s, winds light and variable, and it looks like we're going to get a little bit of a drying out until the weekend or maybe a little sooner, and we'll see how that goes. Temperatures will be increasing ever so slightly, maybe getting into the 80s by the end of the week. Grass pollen is rated high here in the little village of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 29 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is very high at level 8, so take care. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.03 inches. Visibility is at 7 miles, and relative humidity is at 95%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that's why it's called the Weather Underground. London is 60 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 67 and cloudy. Rome is 63 with rain, and they do have a flood watch. Kyiv is 55 degrees and cloudy. Kabul is 55 and clear. Hong Kong is 75 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 55 and fair. Sydney, Australia is 52 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 55 degrees and cloudy, and New York, New York is 70 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Samuel Politi of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. Paraguayan police detained Paraguayo Cubas, a far-right populist who came in third in last week's presidential election and encouraged his supporters to protest over his unsubstantiated claims that the vote was marred by fraud. Cubas was being held in preventative detention under an order by the Attorney General's office that is accusing him of breach of peace. Cubas, the candidate of the National Crusade Party, who received 23% of the votes, was broadcasting live on Facebook when officers detained him outside his hotel in San Lorenzo. Flatus, the police commissioner, said Cubas got into a police vehicle without any difficulty, but he continued streaming live. In his broadcast from inside the police vehicle, Cubas chatted with officers and focused the camera on his handcuffs. He had been telling supporters that he was heading to the Capitol to lead a series of protests that had led to isolated clashes with police, largely outside the electoral court in Asuncion, beginning last Monday. "We will remain on the streets until Paraguayo Cubas is released," said Juan Reyes, one of hundreds of his supporters who took part in demonstrations outside the electoral court. Some 1,500 to 1,800 law enforcement officers were deployed outside the electoral court for the protest staged by Cuba supporters. Authorities also prepared for any demonstration outside the police station where Cubas was taken.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Tricia Thomas and Wyatt Grantham Phillips of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Italian Tourism Ministry thought it had a surefire way to bring travelers to the country, turning a 15th century art icon into a 21st century virtual influencer. The digital rendition of Venus, Goddess of Love, based on Sandro Botticelli's Renaissance masterpiece, Birth of Venus, can be seen noshing on pizza and snapping selfies for her Instagram page. Unlike the original, this Venus is fully clothed. The influencer claims to be 30 or maybe just a wee bit older than that, but the new ad campaign is facing significant backlash, with critics calling it a new Barbie that trashes Italy's cultural heritage. The tourist campaign trivializes our heritage in the most vulgar way, transforming Botticelli's Venus into yet another stereotype female beauty. Livia Garo-Mancini, an art historian and activist with Mio Rinconci, an art and heritage campaign organization, had said in a response to the project last month. The year-long campaign, produced by the National Tourism Agency, ENIT, and advertising group Armando Testa, is estimated to have cost about a little less than $10 million U.S., according to CEO Ivana Jelinek. Jelinek said the campaign was designed for overseas markets to attract younger tourists. The online Venus launched in Italy on April 20th and made her international debut in Dubai at the Arabian travel market last week. Already, the new Venus has been memed mercilessly online, appearing among trash bins, alongside mafia boss Matteo Messina Denaro, and in other less than godly places. The criticism extends beyond the use of a masterpiece to the manner in which the campaign was orchestrated, including its use of stock images and other gaffes, like a promotional video featuring a winery in Slovenia used as a stand-in for Italy. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesday. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Appétit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.